hear me. Well, good evening. I want to thank the Columbia University International Relations for this invitation, and I especially want to thank Nirvikal Jasad, who invited me. The connection between us is his father, who is a very accomplished Indian diplomat, he's now Indian ambassador to Turkey. I've known him for many years, and I'm delighted to extend the connection to the next generation. As some of you may know, there is a correspondent with the Spectator here. I have been a long time and often sharp critic of certain decisions that have been made by Columbia University. There is a saying that honest criticism is hard to take, especially from a friend, an acquaintance, or a stranger. In other words, it doesn't much matter. But for what it's worth, my criticism hasn't been that of a stranger. I've commented as a professional academic, and as a Columbia alumnus, and as a Columbia University Press author, who remembers this great university as a place of diverse approaches and of very high standards. The standards I recall were personified by the late J.C. Hurwitz, with whom I studied here almost 35 years ago. For the younger of you in this audience, the name will mean very little, perhaps nothing. But for many years, Hurwitz dominated the teaching of Columbia University, for which he set a very high bar, I think Jack would agree. I took my first course with Hurwitz, along with fellow student Lisa Anderson, who later succeeded him as the director of the Institute and went on to serve as the dean. And she precisely and elegantly described Hurwitz in these words, and I'd like to quote them. The motif in J.C. Hurwitz's professional life has been a belief in the possibility and desirability of fairness. His commitment to an abstract notion of fairness as a value, both moral and pragmatic, was particularly striking in worlds, Middle Eastern politics, academics, government, where the primacy of personal bias or political inclination has been far more common. There were, of course, those who believed the effort to be misguided, who said, and continue to say, that objectivity is impossible and dispassion irresponsible. Hurwitz did not say he was trying to be objective in any absolute or scientific sense, however. Indeed, epistemological issues are of no interest to him. He has great respect for the passion of others. He strove to be fair. End of quote. This is not the occasion to ask whether Columbia still elevates those who strive to be fair. I do want to take the opportunity to note that my best recollections of Columbia are the moments when J. Hurwitz seemingly floated above partisanship to achieve a higher insight on some highly contentious issue. This is a standard that's not easy to maintain, and I sometimes fail to maintain it myself. But I learned enough here to know that partisanship, while sometimes a personal imperative, is never a scholarly virtue, and certainly should never be mistaken for scholarship. For that distinction, learned at a different Columbia at a different time, I am still very grateful. And that's all I'll say on the topic. It was suggested, perhaps to get out of crowd, that Professor Snyder and I might also discuss Middle Eastern studies at Columbia, or particular Columbia professors. This evening, I'm a guest of the university, which I consider a privilege, in an international relations forum, which defines my scope. And the Middle East, if you study it, should also define your scope as students. Don't allow yourself to be distracted by the academic politics going on above and around you. The politics of the Middle East are so much more interesting and important than the politics of Middle Eastern studies. When I was a graduate student, three events unfolded: Sadat in Jerusalem, Iran's revolution, and Edward Said's Orientalism. The first launched the peace process. The second launched the Islamist wave, both of which are still very much define the Middle East. So spend your time scanning that far horizon. Don't be distracted by the small wars of the professors. I waged a few myself, but I have no illusion that they were all that important or that they always involved a high principle. And for the rest of the evening, I intend to focus exclusively on important matters which are hardly academic. Now, those of you who are undergrads and grad students probably take it for granted that the Middle East is the crucible of world politics and of America's work in the world. One can't be an academic or a think tank expert on American foreign policy without a thorough working knowledge of the Middle East. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have brought something like 1.7 million American personnel on tours of duty in the Middle East, bringing awareness of the region, of course, straight into the American heartland. Many more Americans have studied the map of the Middle East. They know something about its contours. Books on the Middle East have climbed the bestseller list. On campuses, and undergraduate preparation seems incomplete. It doesn't include a course on the Middle East. And Arabic is being offered in a growing number of public schools across the country. Now, in the spring, there appeared the annual survey of international relations professors. And they were asked this question: which area of the world do you consider to be of greatest strategic importance to the United States today? 46% say the Middle East, 30% say East Asia, including China, a mere 6% name the former Soviet Union. This is, of course, a complete reversal of the Cold War order that prevailed when I and Professor Snyder were students. And I haven't told you anything you don't know, but here is an interesting footnote. When the same international relations professors are asked which region will be of greatest strategic importance 20 years from now, the place of the Middle East drops precipitously. 68% predict it will be East Asia. Only 11% predict it will be the Middle East. Now, why? Well, embedded in this prediction is perhaps an anticipation that China will grow mightier. Perhaps there's also an expectation that alternative sources of energy will diminish the significance of the Middle East. But no doubt the prediction rides on some expectation that by then, the United States will have fixed the Middle East so that it no longer generates the kinds of crises that have put it in the cockpit of world policy. Interestingly, these same professors also preferred Barack Obama over John McCain by about 10 to 1. No doubt they imagine that this shift will begin on his watch, and that his new approach is destined to shrink the Middle East to its pre-9/11 size on America's horizon. It's arguably for this anticipated pacification, developization of the Middle East that President Obama has already been awarded the down payment of the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, 1 year into this long-term prediction, is there any evidence that the Middle East is shrinking? Hardly. The war on terror may have been dropped from the lexicon, but the United States will probably send a minimum of 20,000 troops to Afghanistan, maybe more in addition to the 70,000 that are already there. There are still almost 120,000 troops in Iraq. Elsewhere, future crises loom. Iran is closer to a nuclear capability, and the diplomacy to prevent it seems stalled. Israel and the Palestinians aren't even in a negotiation anymore, and early mistakes by the administration have made resumed diplomacy even more remote. The Obama administration hasn't found a reset button for the Middle East, and the buttons that it's pushing aren't doing much of anything. Obama's Nobel Peace Prize ceremony looms as the potential equivalent of George Bush's mission accomplished speech just after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Premature and a bit ominous. Pundits and analysts and professors of international relations, left, right, and center, are all scratching their heads and asking what went wrong. President Obama's supporters obviously expected a lot more, but everyone anticipated at least a higher level of confidence than that of the second Bush administration. Yet here is Harvard's